In the affluent world of New York City, Naomi Harrington, wife of a billionaire, experiences a shocking act of racial profiling at a street fair. This seemingly isolated incident ignites a firestorm of controversy when her husband Rowan leverages his influence and resources to expose systemic racism within the police department. Join us as we explore this powerful story of how a single act of prejudice can become a catalyst for widespread reform, showcasing the extraordinary power of unity and unwavering determination in the face of adversity. When wealth and prejudice collide, truth emerges in the most surprising of ways. Naomi Harrington, a brilliant and poised Black woman, believed her days of proving herself were long over, especially after she married Rowan Harrington, one of the richest men in the country. Yet at a bustling street fair in their beloved city, a single racially charged encounter with a cop shattered her sense of security. The officer's brazen insults and unwarranted demands left her shaken, fueling a slow-burning rage that reached Rowan's ears. His response, carried out on the city's biggest stage, stunned everyone and awakened a call for justice none could ignore. Naomi Brooks never planned to marry a billionaire. Raised in a close-knit middle-class family in Detroit, she grew up hearing her mother's admonitions about self-reliance and her father's tales of neighborhood resilience. Eventually, Naomi's intellect won her scholarships and a top-tier education, leading her to a successful career in consultancy. She consulted for major nonprofits, crafting strategies for educational reforms across America. Rowan Harrington was a titan of industry, Wall Street prodigy turned tech investor with a reputation for unstoppable ambition. He started at Goldman Sachs, a real firm, parlayed success into his own hedge fund, and then pivoted to founding Harrington Global Ventures, a conglomerate spanning e-commerce, biotech, and philanthropy. Despite eye-popping net worth, Rowan was known for an approachable personality. He'd rather meet local community leaders over coffee than flaunt his private jets. The two crossed paths at a charitable gala in New York. Naomi had been consulting for an urban education charity. Rowan was a keynote donor. Their connection, forged over mutual respect for social impact, deepened into quiet romance. Over time, tabloids feasted on headlines about the modest consultant winning the heart of a billionaire. But behind the spectacle lay genuine love. Rowan admired Naomi's brilliance and warm empathy. Naomi respected Rowan's philanthropic drive. Their wedding, modest by billionaire standards, sealed a union that perplexed gossip columns, but felt perfectly natural to them. Yet Naomi's life in Rowan's orbit came with unspoken burdens. She'd encountered microaggressions at high society events, patrons assuming she was an assistant or even the help. Store clerks in exclusive boutiques watched her with hawk-like suspicion. Rowan tried to shield her, reminding staff and acquaintances that she was an equal partner, but prejudice ran deep in the rarefied circles they inhabited. Despite all that, they found happiness in their Midtown Manhattan penthouse, which Naomi decorated with soulful Detroit artwork and cozy reading nooks. Rowan, busy bridging deals across continents, reveled in Naomi's steadying presence. For her part, Naomi learned to handle paparazzi sightings and snide remarks with grace. She continued her philanthropic consultancy, believing that meaningful work would keep her grounded. But one breezy Saturday, as they strolled through a bustling street fair, Naomi discovered how swiftly prejudice could strike, even when you thought you'd seen it all. Rowan had a last-minute call about an emerging biotech deal, so Naomi meandered on her own, sampling artisanal cheeses and fresh pastries, enthralled by the fair's warmth. Street fairs were her sanctuary, vibrant food stalls, local crafts, families ambling about in carefree cheer. She didn't anticipate a policeman's glare following her from stall to stall. The officer was a tall, broad-shouldered man named Officer Kilroy. Stationed at a corner for crowd control, his expression soured each time Naomi lingered too close, as if her very presence spelled trouble. At first, she dismissed it as typical overcaution, but soon she felt the weight of his stare, the suspicious narrowing of his eyes. Why me, she thought, scanning the crowd. Hundreds of patrons roamed freely, yet she sensed Kilroy's fixation on her alone. Trying to ignore him, Naomi wandered toward an alley displaying local art, murals bright with graffiti artistry. Suddenly, Kilroy appeared, barking, "Hey, you!" Step away from that display. She turned, startled. Is there an issue, officer? He took in her brown skin, the casual but chic outfit she wore, and asked for ID. This alley's off limits to unauthorized persons, he declared. Naomi frowned. The alley wasn't blocked off, and other visitors had passed through moments before. She inhaled calmly, retrieving her driver's license from her purse. I have nothing to hide, she told herself. Maybe he was just being thorough. She handed him the ID, heart thudding. He scanned it, lips curling when he read Naomi Harrington on it. Harrington, huh? You one of those Harringtons? His tone dripped with sarcasm. Naomi exhaled. Yes, my husband is Rowan Harrington. I'm here for the fair. The words tasted bitter, as if she was forced to name drop to validate her existence. Kilroy's gaze flicked over her again. Fancy folks shouldn't wander unsupervised, he sneered. Could be up to something, for all we know. She bristled. I'm not up to anything except enjoying the fair. But he demanded she remain there while he radioed for verification. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. People passing by glanced curiously. A hush fell on the alley, overshadowing the fair's lively background hum. Anger mingled with the old familiar sting. Did he suspect me purely because I'm a black woman in a nice outfit? Does he think I must be a criminal or up to no good? She tried to stay composed, recalling her father's advice about dealing with confrontational cops. Yes, officer, was all she muttered, trembling with a quiet rage. She wondered if she should call Rowan, but that too felt like reinforcing the notion that her husband's name was her get-out-of-jail-free card. Little did Officer Kilroy realize he was confronting not just any tourist, but a woman with the power and the will to expose his prejudice on a grand stage. Because once Rowan learned how his wife was treated, the billionaire's reaction would shock the city in a wave that left everyone, from local news anchors to high society, speechless. Rowan Harrington prided himself on remaining unflappable. Whether negotiating multi-million-dollar acquisitions or testifying before congressional panels, he maintained a calm, collected demeanor. But he'd never prepared for the call he got that Saturday. Naomi's trembling voice explaining how an officer was detaining her for no apparent reason. Her breath hitched with every word as she tried to stay calm. Rowan, he's telling me I'm suspicious. He's checking my ID, acting like I shouldn't be here. She paused, voice lowering in shame. It's humiliating. Rowan's heart pounded. Where exactly are you? He asked, forcing calm. She described the alley near the Main Street Fair. He heard Officer Kilroy's muffled commands in the background, stoking his anger. Naomi had always managed subtle microaggressions alone, but this time was different. This was a brazen challenge to her dignity. He ended his business call abruptly. Forget the biotech deal. This was personal. Quickly, he texted his driver to bring the car, and within minutes, Rowan rushed from his office. On the ride downtown, his mind spun in circles. He'd navigated situations with corrupt local officials abroad, but never expected to fight racism so blatantly on home turf. He recalled Naomi's anxieties, the small humiliations she faced daily. He hated that she sometimes felt overshadowed by his wealth, or that her achievements were questioned because of her background. At the fair's edge, he stepped out, scanning stalls teeming with families and musicians. A swirl of color and aroma assaulted his senses, but the joyous atmosphere felt overshadowed by anxiety. He phoned Naomi again. No answer. Probably the officer was restricting her phone use. That thought alone made Rowan's blood boil. He marched swiftly down the row of stands, ignoring the gawks from bystanders who recognized him. A local news station, WNYC, had a camera crew filming highlights of the fair. One cameraman spotted Rowan in a hurry, but Rowan didn't pause for interviews. At last, he found the small alley. People loitered at its entrance, watching a tense scene deeper inside. Some filmed with their phones. Rowan's heart lurched. There, Naomi stood, posture rigid. Opposite her was a tall policeman in a crisp uniform, scanning an ID in his hand. The officer's lips were curled in a sneer. Naomi's eyes locked onto Rowan, relief and frustration mingling on her face. He sprinted over, addressing the officer with forced politeness. I'm Rowan Harrington. That's my wife. Is there a problem? Officer Kilroy gave Rowan a once-over. Your wife, huh? She claims that, but I can't just take her word. He offered no greeting, only suspicion. We got a tip about possible pickpockets around these parts. Rowan's jaw tightened. Pickpockets? She's obviously not picking pockets. But he reined in fury. Is there any sign she committed a crime? If not, release her ID. Let her go. The policeman snorted, stepping forward. Relax, big shot. I'm verifying. Don't tell me how to do my job. He raised his voice. Stay out of police business. This woman was loitering. Rowan inhaled, controlling his temper with difficulty. Loitering? She's at a public festival, for goodness sake. He gestured around. Other people walk through this alley too, right? Some bystanders nodded, muttering among themselves about the selective enforcement. The tension was palpable. The policeman refused to back down. Don't get high and mighty. Money doesn't exempt you from city regulations. Naomi stepped closer to Rowan, slipping her hand into his for silent strength. Rowan squeezed gently, his anger overshadowed by concern for her emotional state. Officer, Rowan said in an even tone, if you have any actual violation, state it clearly. If not, return her ID. I'll speak to your superior if needed. Kilroy's eyes narrowed, bristling at Rowan's confident manner. Is that a threat? At that moment, a local news camera operator, trailing from the festival coverage, crept closer to record the confrontation. The policeman glared at the camera. Rowan, noticing, realized the power of public exposure. If he tries anything, it's on tape. Still, the cop's arrogance remained. I do my job fairly. Don't see color, he sneered, ironically revealing his bias by disclaiming it. But your wife sure looks out of place, creeping around where she shouldn't be. Naomi's face hardened. She opened her mouth to retort, but Rowan gently squeezed her hand again, stepping forward. We're done here. We're leaving. If you want to file a complaint, go ahead. But do not detain her further without probable cause. That's the law. Kilroy scowled, tension thick in the alley. The crowd murmured. Then with a scornful laugh, he tossed Naomi's ID back to her. Fine. Next time, stay where you belong, he hissed. She flinched inwardly but kept her chin high. Her pride demanded she not show how shaken she felt. Rowan placed an arm protectively around Naomi's shoulders, steering her away. People parted, filming them as they departed. The policeman lingered behind, face twisted with resentment. Rowan felt a swirl of emotions, rage, relief, heartbreak, knowing that the only reason Naomi got off unscathed was his timely arrival and name recognition. What if she'd been alone? As they left the alley, the local news crew rushed forward, microphones extended. Mr. Harrington, can you comment on that confrontation? Someone asked. Rowan paused, his mind whirring. Usually he avoided impromptu statements, but he recognized a chance to publicly denounce what had happened. He turned, addressing the camera calmly. I'm disappointed. My wife was harassed without cause. This city deserves better policing standards. We'll be addressing this with relevant authorities. The camera recorded Naomi, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, standing stoic. The reporter tried to get more details, but Rowan politely declined further comment. With that, they threaded back into the festival crowd. Naomi's composure finally cracked once they were alone in Rowan's car. She stared out the window, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Rowan rubbed her back, heartbreak etched in his gaze. I'm so sorry, he murmured. We can't let him get away with this. She nodded, swallowing. We won't. But I hate that I had to stand there, powerless, until you arrived. Her voice trembled. It's not just me. It's every woman, every person of color who faces this daily, without your phone number or resources. Rowan's jaw set. He made a silent vow. That officer's bigotry wouldn't fade away quietly. He'd not just confront the local precinct, but would use every platform, media, legal channels, civic relationships to ensure accountability. If the policeman had the audacity to degrade Naomi, how many others had he targeted? The seeds of a massive public reckoning were sown, and as the city soon discovered, Rowan's determination to defend Naomi would spark an uproar that left everyone speechless, culminating in a chain of events revealing the city's deep-seated biases. and how swiftly those biases could be toppled when wealth, justice, and unstoppable resolve converged. That same evening, local news aired footage of Rowan Harrington confronting Officer Kilroy, accompanied by eyewitness accounts from the fair. The segment quickly circulated online, generating a storm of social media chatter. Naomi, exhausted, turned off her phone to avoid the barrage of pings and notifications. Rowan, however, studied the coverage, strategizing the next steps. The next day, a swirl of public responses engulfed them. Friends, business associates, philanthropic contacts, even distant acquaintances reached out. Some offered sincere sympathy. Others, albeit well-meaning, uttered the dreaded phrase, "I can't believe something like this still happens," revealing their privilege-blinded surprise. The incident was hardly unbelievable to Naomi. The Harrington Foundation offices braced for the media onslaught. Usually known for championing educational programs or hospital wings, Rowan's philanthropic team now found themselves fielding press queries about racism, policing, and Naomi's ordeal. At an emergency staff meeting, Rowan asked for calm but decisive action. 1. Prepare an official statement condemning discriminatory policing and advocating reform. 2. Offer support to any local community group fighting police bias. 3. Keep Naomi's personal well-being at the forefront. She was no commodity for press exploitation. Meanwhile, Naomi wrestled with conflicting emotions. She wanted to speak out, to harness the spotlight for meaningful change, but the raw vulnerability from the alley left her battered. At Rowan's gentle urging, she agreed to meet with his PR advisor, Claire Morrison, to plan the messaging carefully, ensuring no tabloid spin overshadowed the real issue. Claire suggested a measured approach, a press release from Naomi that grounded her experience in the broader context of everyday harassment. "You have moral authority," Claire said gently. "Sharing your story helps highlight those who don't have your resources." Naomi nodded, though she dreaded the scrutiny. She recalled how Ebony Martin, a civil rights activist she once worked with, had always encouraged her to speak from a personal vantage to incite empathy. Now that vantage was horrifyingly personal. Word of the confrontation soon reached the city's civil rights community. Familiar names in activism, leaders from the NAACP, local Black Lives Matter chapters, and the Urban League, contacted Naomi, expressing solidarity. Ebony Martin, a fervent community organizer Naomi knew from a school reform project, invited her to a vigil denouncing racial profiling. "Your presence would speak volumes," Ebony said. "It's not about your wealth, it's about your humanity." Naomi agreed to attend, feeling a sense of responsibility. Rowan wholeheartedly supported her. He arranged for discreet personal security. He worried about potential backlash from extremist corners or random threats. In the past, he'd brushed off negative messages, but this time the hostility might target Naomi directly. Simultaneously, law enforcement circles buzzed with tension. The local precinct's leadership faced calls for an investigation into Officer Kilroy. Some fellow officers interviewed by the press tried to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding, but certain insiders admitted to journalists that Kilroy had a history of friction with community members of color. No formal complaints had stuck. Lack of evidence, intimidation, or departmental hush-ups, perhaps. Rowan's lawyers took note, suspecting a pattern. Then came an unlikely ally, Detective Laura Brooks, assigned to internal affairs. She anonymously reached out to Naomi's email stating, "I respect your perseverance. If you plan to file a complaint, do it quickly. I can't guarantee departmental support, but if more people step forward about Kilroy, we might have a case." The covert message gave Naomi chills, proof that institutional obstacles lay ahead. Aware that silence breeds impunity, the Harringtons decided to hold a brief press conference. Organized on the steps of a local community center, it would let them voice condemnation of the officers' actions and announce their commitment to addressing policing bias. Ebony Martin helped mobilize a small crowd of supporters. Rowan's staff prepped a statement. The city braced for the Harringtons to publicly weigh in. The day of the press conference was overcast, as though the sky recognized the gravity. Naomi, flanked by Rowan and Ebony, approached a podium set before a throng of reporters. Cameras rolled. Microphones jutted forward. Naomi's pulse hammered, but she lifted her chin, recalling her father's voice. Don't let them steal your dignity. She spoke of the alley encounter, describing the unprovoked suspicion, the officer's contempt. I stand here not just for myself, she said, voice trembling with emotion, but for the countless others who endure this daily, without a billionaire spouse or the phone number of city officials. No one's status should determine whether they're safe from harassment. Rowan then took the mic, measured and resolute. We respect law enforcement's vital role, but blatant prejudice must be uprooted. Our foundation will invest in legal aid for victims of police bias and will press for departmental reforms. Body cams at public events, transparent complaint reviews, mandatory suspension for repeated misconduct. We invite city officials to join us in meaningful action. The crowd erupted in questions. One reporter asked if they intended to sue. Rowan admitted they'd explore all legal avenues to ensure accountability. Another inquired about Naomi's mental state. She confessed she felt violated, but was channeling her hurt into activism. Ebony Martin concluded the session with a rallying call. This is bigger than one family's humiliation. Let's demand a system that respects every community member. The press coverage soared. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #Stand with Naomi, #. A wave of empathy and solidarity blossomed, though naysayers grumbled about rich folks stirring drama. Meanwhile, Rowan quietly coordinated with Detective Brooks, preparing an official complaint. They found at least 2 other black women who alleged similarly tense run-ins with Kilroy, though none had pressed charges. Their testimonies, if corroborated, could demonstrate a pattern. As night fell, Naomi laid awake, replaying the day's swirl in her mind. The alley's memory still stung, but the community's outpouring heartened her. She felt a glimmer of hope that maybe for once, an officer abusing his power wouldn't be shielded by the uniform. Elsewhere across the city, Officer Kilroy watched the broadcast in smoldering resentment. Word had it that Internal Affairs was sniffing around. His union rep seemed nervous. He hammered a fist on his couch's armrest, cursing, "That stuck-up lady," for making him a target. Little did he know, the chain of events triggered by his arrogance was about to escalate beyond anything he'd ever imagined, setting in motion consequences that would define the city's narrative for months to come. Within days, the Harringtons' press conference triggered ripples in every corner of the city. Activists rallied behind Naomi's clarion call, forming a grassroots coalition named Fair Policing Now. They organized peaceful demonstrations outside precinct headquarters, carrying signs reading, "Naomi's not alone," and accountability for all officers. Ebony Martin emerged as a galvanizing voice, citing the Harrington incident as an emblem of systematic profiling. Concurrently, the city's power brokers took notice. Aware of Rowan Harrington's reputation for philanthropic influence and political connections, local elected officials began floating statements about zero tolerance for bias. Council member Richard Alvarez publicly stated he'd propose an emergency session to consider new policing oversight measures. The mayor's office scheduled a meeting with Rowan to discuss civic collaboration, an olive branch that might or might not yield actual reforms. However, not everyone was sympathetic. Anonymous trolls on social media branded Naomi an attention seeker, accusing her of using the race card for personal glory. Right-leaning talk radio hosts fanned conspiracy theories, claiming Rowan wanted to defund the police. Naomi's inbox brimmed with hateful messages. She tried to ignore them, focusing on supportive voices. But the negativity stung, reminding her prejudice wore many guises. Officer Kilroy, meanwhile, felt cornered. He filed a union-backed statement painting Naomi as uncooperative and Rowan as an elitist throwing weight around. Some union hardliners spoke at a small press gathering, accusing the Harringtons of villainizing a dedicated cop who was just ensuring festival safety. Their argument that the Harrington name bulldozed standard procedure found limited traction but was amplified in certain echo chambers. Amid the swirling discourse, Rowan quietly arranged a private meeting with the city's police commissioner, Marisol Reyes. Commissioner Reyes, relatively new to the role, had been pushing for modernization. Over coffee in a discreet lounge, Rowan outlined his concerns. The culture allowing an officer like Kilroy to act with impunity, the lack of checks on complaints, and the terrifying ease with which the powerless could be silenced. Reyes listened attentively, conceding that Internal Affairs was investigating. She hinted that multiple older complaints against Kilroy were under review. She urged Rowan to be patient, promising, "If we find a pattern, disciplinary action will follow." Rowan pressed for more transparency, but Reyes was noncommittal. Back at home, Naomi found herself struggling with waves of anxiety. She'd begun having nightmares, flashbacks to the alley confrontation, an irrational dread that next time, Rowan might not arrive in time. Sensing her distress, Rowan suggested she see a therapist. She initially resisted, feeling it was dramatic, but eventually recognized the need to process the trauma. Dr. Caroline Moore, a psychologist with experience counseling victims of harassment, helped Naomi articulate her fears. "You've been catapulted into a major public fight," Dr. Moore said. "It's natural to feel overwhelmed." Despite internal turmoil, Naomi persevered with her philanthropic consultancy. She guided a new youth literacy initiative in the Bronx, refusing to let that policeman overshadow her life's work. Her staff admired her resilience, though they shielded her from negativity whenever possible. Ebony Martin often dropped by with small gestures, homemade cookies, uplifting chat, keeping Naomi grounded in positivity. An unexpected ally surfaced from the business realm. Jake Tapper, a well-known anchor from CNN and Real Name, expressed interest in a televised segment featuring Naomi and Ebony discussing structural racism. Initially nervous, Naomi weighed it carefully. A major national platform could shift the local conversation from sensational drama to deeper policy changes. Ebony agreed. "This is a chance to pivot from your personal story to widespread calls for accountability. Let's do it." They arranged the interview. On a Tuesday evening, Jake Tapper welcomed them to a calm, modern studio. He introduced Naomi as the philanthropic consultant married to billionaire Rowan Harrington, thrust into a debate on policing after a harrowing personal experience. Ebony Martin was billed as a leading grassroots activist. Over the course of the segment, they recounted the fair incident, the background of repeated bias complaints, and the city's precarious steps toward reform. Ebony hammered home how Naomi's wealth shielded her from the worst outcomes, but didn't spare her from humiliating suspicion. Naomi stressed that her real wish was for every person, rich or not, to feel secure from arbitrary prejudice. Their discussion aired to national audiences, receiving a wave of social media commentary. Many hailed Naomi's poise, Ebony's passion, and Jake Tapper's thoughtful questions. A new wave of solidarity posts poured in, overshadowing the bigoted barbs. The city recognized the confrontation wasn't a local gossip item, but part of a nationwide reckoning on race and policing. Officer Kilroy watched, fuming. Each piece of publicity chipped away at his self-righteous stance. His union pressed him to maintain innocence. But rumors emerged that Internal Affairs had discovered multiple complaints from minority families, quietly hushed by supervisors. If these details became official, Kilroy's career hung by a thread. The tension reached a fever pitch when the precinct announced a preliminary IA hearing date for Kilroy. This hearing, determining if he'd face disciplinary measures or full-blown termination, turned into a citywide flashpoint. Activists planned to rally outside. Union leaders swore to defend their officer. The Harrington legal team prepared a formal complaint package with testimonies from other alleged victims who stepped forward upon seeing Naomi's bravery. Naomi tried to remain calm. She steeled herself for the possibility that, even with evidence, the system might protect Kilroy. She recalled Ebony's caution. "We need robust public outcry, or they'll bury it." Rowan, unstoppable in strategy, coordinated with Ebony and other leaders to ensure the hearing's outcome wouldn't vanish in a backroom deal. Late one night, Naomi sat on her apartment balcony, gazing at the city lights. Rowan joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She whispered, "Sometimes I can't believe how huge this got. I just wanted to enjoy a street fair. Now I'm a face for something bigger." He nodded, pressing his cheek to hers. "I know, but that's the power of your story. We can't unsee the injustice. This might change so many lives." She leaned into him, comforted. Yes, she thought, maybe real change was possible, even if it required her to stand in the harshest glare of public scrutiny. Time ticked toward the IA hearing, promising a day of reckoning for an officer who once brazenly threatened a billionaire's wife. The city braced for the outcome, not realizing how swiftly fate and the Harringtons' unwavering stand would converge to deliver a thunderous blow against prejudice. The day arrived under dreary skies, a light rain pattering on the pavement. It matched the city's mood, anticipation laced with unease. At the Internal Affairs Division building, crowds formed early, activists chanting slogans, union members gathering in support of Kilroy, and a throng of reporters jockeying for vantage points. Police officers stood on guard, ensuring tensions didn't boil over. Naomi stepped out of the Harrington SUV with Rowan at her side. They wore solemn expressions, determined to see this through. Ebony Martin joined them, accompanied by a handful of alleged victims who'd filed statements. Cameras flashed instantly. The media sensed drama in the air. Naomi's heart hammered, but she mustered composure, refusing to let fear be visible. Inside, the IA hearing room resembled a cross between a courtroom and an administrative board. At the front sat a panel of 3 senior officers and 1 civilian representative, assigned to weigh the evidence. Officer Kilroy and his union lawyer occupied one table. Naomi, Rowan, Ebony, and a few others who testified formed the opposing side, supported by the Harringtons' attorney, Giselle Rollins. Proceedings opened with an official reading of charges. Officer Kevin Kilroy stands accused of discriminatory policing and harassment, specifically citing the incident with Naomi Harrington and potential prior complaints from multiple individuals. The union lawyer immediately objected, claiming the prior complaints were unsubstantiated hearsay. The panel retorted that these complaints, while not proven, contextualized a pattern. One by one, testimonies unfolded. Ebony introduced alleged victims, a Latino teen, a black retail worker, who described encounters with Kilroy featuring unwarranted stops and condescending slurs. Tension rose as each recounted humiliations long buried by fear. The union lawyer grilled them, searching for contradictions. Some details blurred from memory, but collectively, their stories painted a disturbing mosaic. Then came Naomi's turn. She described that festival day, the casual stroll, the alley curiosity, Kilroy's hostility. Her voice trembled at times, recounting how powerless she felt until Rowan arrived. The union lawyer tried to pry holes in her story. Were you actually loitering? Did you disobey his instructions? She calmly refuted, referencing bystander videos that captured Kilroy's aggressive manner. She ended softly. I believed I was safe in my own city, but that day, he made me feel worthless. Kilroy maintained a stony silence, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. When the panel invited him to speak, he offered a defiant monologue. I've served this city for years. Harrington's used his billions to stir a media witch hunt. I was doing my job, checking suspicious persons in a known trouble spot. Her attitude was confrontational. He pointed at Naomi. I didn't see color, only potential wrongdoing. He insisted the other complaints were false or exaggerated, again calling them a smear orchestrated by people wanting a payday. The panel listened, expressions neutral, but the tension in the room thickened. Kilroy's words dripped with condescension. Rowan then testified briefly, confirming how calmly Naomi had complied. He reiterated the police radio had no bulletins referencing that alley or suspicious activity. He also reminded the panel that Harrington's wealth wasn't the issue. Rather, it was the misuse of authority to degrade someone perceived as vulnerable. The gravity of Rowan's presence, along with evidence of repeated complaints, undercut Kilroy's defense. After hours of back and forth, the hearing paused for the panel to deliberate behind closed doors. The corridor outside buzzed with anxious conversation. Ebony led a small prayer circle for justice. The union side looked grim but resolute. Naomi paced, Rowan's hand on her shoulder. She dreaded the possibility that departmental bias might shield Kilroy. Yet she also sensed the unstoppable momentum of truth. At last, the panel returned. The lead officer cleared her throat, eyes scanning the room. We find substantial evidence Officer Kilroy engaged in biased policing, culminating in the incident with Mrs. Harrington. Additionally, multiple older complaints suggest a pattern of racial profiling. We recommend disciplinary measures up to and including termination. The hush that followed felt electric, then a flurry of reactions. relief from the victims, union outrage, reporters scrambling to file stories. Kilroy's face paled, set in a silent fury. The union lawyers sputtered about appeals. Ebony embraced Naomi, tears of joy sparkling. Rowan exhaled, shutting his eyes momentarily in gratitude. Naomi felt the swirling tension in her chest finally crack open, replaced by a sense of victory tempered by sadness for the whole fiasco. As the hearing concluded, a union statement declared they'd fight the recommendation. Still, the panel's stance was unmistakable. Kilroy's brand of policing was unacceptable. Naomi quietly thanked the panel, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. She approached Kilroy once more, but the policeman refused eye contact, muttering curses under his breath. Outside, a throng of cameras awaited. Ebony delivered a brief statement. Today's hearing proves that no matter one's rank or uniform, racism can't be hidden. We're proud the IA listened to facts. Let this mark a turning point for genuine accountability. Naomi, voice trembling, said, I appreciate the department's thoroughness, but we must ensure no other person endures this. Our struggle isn't over. The supporters erupted in cheers, chanting Naomi's name. Rowan guided her through the crowd. Some local politicians, smelling the shift in public sentiment, approached to congratulate them. She felt half in a dream. Her personal humiliation had spurred systemic reflection. Perhaps, she mused, the city was inching toward a fairer future. Late that night, Rowan and Naomi shared a quiet moment on their penthouse balcony. City lights sparkled below. Exhaustion weighed on them, but also triumph. She leaned her head against his chest. We did it, she whispered. He nodded, kissing her hair. Yes, and we'll keep pushing for more reforms. She gazed at the skyline, reflecting on that fateful alley. Life had changed drastically since then, once humiliated, now vindicated. The policeman's expression, once smug, turned desperate, but she knew the path to actual structural change stretched ahead. This victory might ignite broader transformations, body cams at public events, better oversight of complaints, new dialogues about race and policing. The road was long, but Naomi found solace in the journey's hopeful direction. As dawn broke, the city awoke to headlines proclaiming, "Cop guilty of racial bias, Harrington family stands for justice." The shockwaves from the hearing would reverberate through the union, the department, and beyond. The stage was set for a deeper confrontation between those clinging to old ways and the unstoppable wave demanding equality. And while Naomi's personal ordeal ended, the movement she sparked carried on, fueled by a once-shamed voice turned unstoppable advocate. Despite the internal affairs decision, Officer Kilroy showed no sign of capitulation. The police union, led by longtime President Warren Mullen, escalated the fight, filing an official appeal to keep Kilroy on the force, casting doubt on IA's fairness. They insisted Naomi's influence had tainted the process, claiming Rowan Harrington's billions turned a standard police check into a scandal. Such rhetoric ignited corners of social media that thrived on conspiracies about wealthy elites pulling strings. A handful of radio talk show hosts championed Kilroy as a scapegoat, sacrificed to appease the PC mob. Meanwhile, moderate voices recognized the union's desperation, seeing the weight of evidence that had surfaced. Ebony Martin publicly mocked their stance. Interesting how they cry unfair after ignoring countless minority complaints for years. Naomi found herself exhausted by the unending swirl of opinions, some supportive, some vile. She wanted to return to her philanthropic work. Yet the union's push for a new hearing threatened to overshadow the progress they'd made. Rowan, discreetly coordinating with civic allies, lobbied for a city ordinance that would limit union powers to block misconduct penalties. The mayor's staff signaled potential backing if public outcry remained high. Meanwhile, Ebony and her network arranged a peaceful rally outside City Hall, demanding final confirmation of Kilroy's termination. They labeled it a day of unity, encouraging families who'd faced harassment from any officer to share stories. Naomi wrestled with whether to attend. Public fatigue might brand her a media fixture. But Ebony insisted, "Your presence reaffirms that we don't back down until the union stands down." Ultimately, Naomi agreed. On rally day, the crowd thronged City Hall steps, chanting slogans for accountability. Ebony Martin emceed, introducing mothers from low-income neighborhoods who recounted run-ins with Kilroy's brand of intimidation. Their testimonies were raw, painting a grim mosaic of fear. Each story validated the notion that Naomi's incident was just the tip of a festering iceberg. Then Naomi stepped forward to a hush. Looking over the diverse crowd, activists, church groups, everyday citizens, she spoke from the heart. My story got headlines because of who I'm married to. But these mothers, these families, they face the same injustice unseen. If we only fix my problem, we fail them. Let's ensure no officer can ever again treat someone like a threat just for existing. Applause roared. Reporters took note. This wasn't self-indulgence, but solidarity. In the background, Ebony nodded approvingly. A few union representatives loitered, scowling, but kept quiet. The tide of public sentiment leaned heavily toward reforms that once felt radical. New complaint oversight boards, a crackdown on racial bias trainings, and real accountability for repeat offenders. At City Hall offices, some officials fretted about union backlash, aware that the union threatened work slowdowns. But the Harrington brand carried weight in business circles, and with Ebony's grassroots clout, the moral argument was strong. Whispers of a possible legislative session to formalize A's authority surfaced. Rowan, behind the scenes, pledged philanthropic support for implementing any new policies. Watching the day unfold, Naomi felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The union's final stand appeared shaky. Public favor sided with victims. Yet she braced for the next shoe to drop, suspecting the union might attempt a lawsuit or target them with personal attacks. Sure enough, the next morning, tabloids plastered a manufactured scandal about Naomi's questionable past, rehashing old gossip. The piece fizzled quickly as no real dirt existed, but it signaled the union's willingness to stoop low. The final blow arrived a week later. A judge refused the union's injunction to block Kilroy's termination, citing ample evidence of misconduct. The union's last legal recourse collapsed, effectively sealing Kilroy's fate. He was officially dismissed from the force. The city's tabloids pivoted to news stories, while national coverage praised the Harringtons for championing reform. Ebony's coalition seized momentum, demanding broader reforms, not just a single scapegoat. Naomi discovered a sense of peace. The policeman who demeaned her was gone. But the victory felt incomplete. One racist cop ousted while others might still lurk. She resolved not to let the movement stall. Ebony, Rowan, and Naomi began drafting a blueprint for better policing. A multi-pronged approach combining community-led oversight, mandatory bias training, and streamlined accountability channels. They planned to pitch it to the mayor, buoyed by the city's supportive climate. Despite the union's grandstanding, real cracks appeared in its monolithic front. Younger officers signaled that they welcomed reforms, tired of a culture shielding bad actors. Local editorial boards praised the Harringtons for using privilege to uplift demands from everyday people. A cultural shift was brewing, small but tangible. Late one evening, Rowan found Naomi sipping tea on their balcony again, the city glowing below. He quietly asked how she felt, now that Kilroy was gone. She set her cup down, gazing across the skyline. Relieved, but not triumphant. This was never about one man's downfall. It's about ensuring the next suspicious cop doesn't have free rein to shatter someone's dignity. Rowan kissed her temple. We'll keep forging alliances. We'll keep Ebony and the communities front and center. Together, we'll turn these sparks into lasting change. She nodded, lips curving into a soft smile. The tension that once haunted her sleep had eased. In its place, a fresh resolve shaped her days. She'd learned that harnessing wealth and public attention for a moral cause could reshape the narrative. The union had tried to fight back, but truth found unstoppable allies in compassion and unity. Naomi intended to see that alliance flourish, ensuring no one else would endure an alley confrontation alone and powerless. 4 months after the union's final defeat, seeds of deeper reform had begun sprouting across the city. The city council introduced new ordinances requiring transparent data on every complaint lodged against officers. Another measure banned hush settlements, ensuring complainants who sought restitution could also speak publicly if they wished. All these steps hammered away at the old code of silence, once protecting rogue cops like Kilroy. Naomi, though relieved, remained grounded. She knew the system was complex, and no single set of laws could uproot centuries of bias. Yet each move forward represented a victory for the many who'd been silenced. Ebony Martin's group, Fair Policing Now, grew in membership, setting up local watchdog committees. The Harrington Foundation pitched in with funding for training seminars that taught de-escalation and anti-bias techniques. The city's press also shifted narratives. Where once they featured sensational stories of Naomi's harassment, they now highlighted the collaborative model between civil society, philanthropic resources, and progressive-minded police officials. Ebony joked to Naomi, "You see, even tabloids can change their tune if the public demands it." Meanwhile, Officer Kilroy drifted into obscurity. Rumors circulated that he'd left the state, possibly seeking a job in smaller towns. Some feared he might continue his prejudice elsewhere. Naomi disliked dwelling on him. Her focus lay on preventing future Kilroys from flourishing. One day, Ebony told her that a new generation of officers recognized the cautionary tale. Messing with community members, billionaire's wife or not, could lead to swift consequences if they abused their badge. Rowan, for his part, balanced his corporate empire with philanthropic expansions. He poured resources into bridging policing tech with community oversight, funding an experimental pilot that used real-time analytics on stops to detect patterns of profiling. Critics called it surveillance creep, but Rowan argued it was voluntary, with built-in privacy safeguards. Naomi, serving as a consultant on the pilot, ensured communities had veto power over data usage. Quietly, Naomi also penned a series of op-eds for the city's major newspaper, the New York Times, reflecting on her journey from humiliation to activism. Her writing humanized the story, highlighting not just the drama, but the broader context, how everyday racism seeps into institutions, how forging alliances spurs change. Feedback soared, with readers praising her clear, empathetic voice. A key moment arrived when the city arranged a public forum titled Building Trust in Policing, featuring the mayor, Commissioner Reyes, Ebony Martin, Naomi Harrington, and a cross-section of officers. Televised citywide, it aimed to address community grievances and the forward path. Tension simmered at first, especially from older conservative cops. But Ebony, with her disarming candor, and Naomi, with her even-handed approach, managed to steer the dialogue to practical solutions. By the end, the mayor praised the synergy, pledging full municipal support. After that forum, Ebony confided to Naomi that local activism soared. Neighborhood watch groups, often suspicious of cops, now found some open-minded officers eager to build rapport. Naomi considered it a small but meaningful shift away from the you versus them dynamic. Rowan was equally inspired, telling Naomi, "Your courage started something real, love. Let's keep nurturing it." Behind the scenes, of course, cynics existed. Some union factions grumbled about political correctness run amok. Certain talk radio channels still labeled the Harringtons limousine liberals. But the city's mainstream recognized that ignoring bias was no longer an option. Naomi's story had cracked open a facade, exposing the ugly roots of prejudice.
As the months rolled on, Naomi found a new calm. She resumed personal passions like hosting dinner parties for philanthropic allies, traveling occasionally to speak at national conferences about bridging the gap between wealth and activism. She realized how her personal brand had transformed from quiet consultant to a voice for social justice. Though still uneasy with fame, she recognized the necessity of that role. One evening, Ebony arranged a surprise community appreciation event in Naomi's honor, complete with local artists performing songs about empowerment. Dozens of families Naomi had never met personally came to express gratitude for how she'd forced the city to face an unpleasant truth. Overwhelmed, Naomi nearly wept on stage. Thanking them in turn, she insisted, "I'm not a savior, just someone who couldn't stay silent. We did this together." The next morning, she and Rowan strolled through the same street fair site where everything began months prior. This time, no suspicious officer shadowed her steps. The air felt lighter, the vendors friendlier, as if all recognized that a barrier had lifted. Naomi paused in the very alley. Her chest tightened, recalling the moment of forced ID checks, the policeman's sneer. Rowan put an arm around her waist. "We changed this place," he murmured. She nodded, inhaling the new sense of freedom. "Yes, we did, and I want to keep changing it." As they walked away, the city's hum enveloped them, a living testament to how swiftly prejudice can be confronted when the right forces unite. And though cynics might remain, the seeds of lasting change had sunk deep, nurtured by one woman's refusal to accept humiliation and one billionaire's vow to champion her cause, unleashing a wave of justice that left everyone, even naysayers, speechless. A year after Naomi's ordeal, the city felt subtly reborn. Public gatherings blossomed in a new atmosphere of cooperation. The Harrington Foundation's Fair Policing Collaborative established rotating training workshops, forging partnerships with police departments from neighboring counties. Ebony Martin's grassroots coalition thrived, no longer just about protest signs, but about forging tangible solutions. During the second anniversary of the street fair, now renamed the Unity and Culture Festival, organizers insisted on inviting Naomi as an honored guest. At first, she hesitated. Memories of that humiliating confrontation still stung. But Ebony reminded her how the festival had become a symbol of transformation. Rowan, too, encouraged her to go, seeing it as a chance to celebrate how adversity birthed a new era. On the sunny day of the festival, Naomi arrived to find a vibrant celebration more inclusive than ever before. Food stalls from countless cultures, live music stages, children dancing in a carnival atmosphere. Policing at the event was performed by officers who'd voluntarily undergone advanced bias and de-escalation training. Naomi noticed them interacting calmly with the crowd, offering directions or assisting lost kids. No tension simmered in the corners. She wandered from stall to stall, sampling Haitian patties and Mediterranean sweets, greeting smiling vendors who recognized her from media coverage. Ebony Martin emceed a central performance stage, occasionally pointing out how 1 year ago we saw darkness here. Now we stand in the light of progress. Cheers erupted. Rowan joined her mid-afternoon, fresh from a philanthropic meeting. They walked hand in hand, weaving through families. The festival's main stage soon hosted a short ceremony unveiling a mural titled "Hope in the Alley," depicting a woman standing tall against swirling shadows. The artist dedicated it to Naomi, crediting her stance as a catalyst for bridging police and community. Tears prickled Naomi's eyes as she admired the mural's vibrant colors. The swirl of shapes behind the woman in the painting echoed the old trauma, but also radiated a sense of triumph. Ebony handed Naomi a microphone, inviting her to say a few words. She swallowed her emotion, stepping forward. "I used to walk these streets and think I was safe until proven otherwise," she began. "But last year taught me that for many, safety is conditional on the biases of those in power. My confrontation forced me, and all of us, to see that complacency can't be an option. And look at us now. New laws, new training, new trust. This festival stands not as a stage for my story, but for everyone's story of resilience." A hush cloaked the crowd. She concluded softly, "None of this would have happened if we'd stayed silent. Each of us can be the spark that ends a cycle of injustice. Thank you for letting me be part of this city's evolution." Thunderous applause followed. Rowan squeezed her hand, eyes glistening with pride. Ebony wrapped her in a fierce hug. Cameras from local news stations captured the moment. The air pulsed with unity rather than tension, a testament to how swiftly hearts can change when confronted with raw truth. Afterward, Rowan and Naomi strolled around the fair, soaking in the cheerful energy. A group of uniformed officers, men and women of diverse backgrounds, waved politely at them. Naomi waved back with a smile. No suspicion, no rancor. This is how it should be, she thought. Night fell, and the festival lights glowed like stars. Naomi and Rowan found themselves near the same alley that once served as the stage for her humiliation. Except now, the alley brimmed with a mini art exhibit and families exploring. No lurking officer waited to question her, just the gentle hum of conversation and laughter. Catching Rowan's eye, Naomi breathed in relief. "It feels like a different place," she murmured. He nodded. "Because we helped make it that way." She leaned her head on his shoulder, tears glinting. "We overcame. We changed not just the festival, but the city's pulse. Our stand for justice expanded into something bigger than ourselves." They walked back to the main thoroughfare, where Ebony Martin approached with a grin. Ready for the final performance? They're dedicating it to bridging communities. Naomi nodded, her heart full. The final performance turned out to be a rousing multicultural dance medley, symbolizing the city's tapestry. The crowd joined in spontaneously, forging a living, breathing mosaic of acceptance. In that moment, Naomi felt her journey had come full circle. The hateful confrontation was overshadowed by the unstoppable resilience that followed. She realized that yes, she was the billionaire's wife who faced a racist cop, but she was also Naomi Harrington, a sister, a consultant, a leader who harnessed tragedy to spark transformation. Hard karma indeed struck back against bigotry, leaving the city speechless and spurring a lasting change that transcended mere headlines. Thank you for following Naomi Harrington's courageous journey. From a horrifying moment of racial profiling at a public fair to the unstoppable wave of reform she and her husband Rowan set in motion. In exposing one officer's prejudice, Naomi became a galvanizing force, turning her personal pain into a resounding call for accountability. We witnessed community organizers, everyday citizens, and even elements within law enforcement banding together to rebuild trust. Proof that even the most entrenched bias can bend under the pressure of unity and moral conviction. If you found Naomi's story inspiring, the tension, the resilience, and the triumph of justice, please like this video to show your support. Share it with friends and community members who value equality, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives of hope and courage. Your engagement helps shine a light on these stories, reminding us all that we can be catalysts for change in our own communities. Together, let's keep demanding a fairer world for everyone.